If there's one thing I've learned, it's the more we run from God, the more He chases us, with love. And no, that's not poetry. It's a fact. For a long time, I said it loud and clear, church? Not for me. I used to think faith was for weak people, those who needed emotional crutches to get through life. I believed I could handle things on my own, with logic, books, and work. And honestly, it worked. For a while. Until everything fell apart, and I found myself on the floor, not knowing how to get back up. The craziest part? When God decided to reach me, He didn't come with thunder or punishment. He came through silence. Through unexpected encounters. Through a song that made me cry, even though I didn't know why. He caught me off guard, right in the middle of an ordinary routine, and led me straight to a place I swore I'd never step into. And it was there, in that simple little brick church, that my life started to be rebuilt, piece by piece, tear by tear. My name is Lucy Campbell. I'm 44 years old, I live in Colorado, and I work in project management for a multinational company. On the outside, I've always seemed strong, confident, and independent. But inside, I carried wounds I didn't even know were there, until the day God brought me to church. Not out of obligation. Not because of religion. But because of love. A love that waited for me, even when I was doing everything I could to run away. And today, I need to tell you this story. For many years, if someone said, "Want to go to church?" my answer would come before they even finished the sentence, "No way." I made it very clear that church wasn't for me. It wasn't just a casual phrase, I truly believed it. One of those beliefs you repeat so often, you start to accept it without question. The truth is, behind all that resistance was a sense of self-sufficiency disguised as freedom. I didn't need religion. At least, that's what I proudly told myself, with a bit of arrogance too. I remember rolling my eyes whenever someone said "God bless you." It felt fake, like they were trying to force their beliefs on me. In my mind, church was for weak people, those who were lost, or who needed an invisible shoulder to cry on. I thought I was strong enough to walk through life alone. And, ironically, I used to laugh at people who said they depended on God. It was like they lived on another planet. That attitude of "I'm always right"? That was me, 100%. I used to say, loud and clear, "I don't need church to be a good person." And let's be honest, that sentence sounds nice on paper, but it hides something deeper. Because inside, I was carrying things I couldn't even name. Wounds covered up with sarcasm. Distrust dressed up as logic. And between one ironic comment and the next, I kept pushing away any chance of being truly touched. Little did I know that, behind all my firm convictions, God had already prepared a quiet path, a shortcut that would lead me straight to the very thing I claimed to reject. My disconnect from faith didn't come out of nowhere. There's always a beginning, and mine started at home. I grew up watching my dad use Bible verses like weapons and my mom quietly crying after church. The hypocrisy was there, masked as devotion. They talked about love, but lived in constant conflict. How could I trust something that was supposed to bring peace but only created fear and judgment? It felt like living in a play where everyone had memorized the verses, but no one knew what real forgiveness looked like. As a teenager, I started noticing how Christians treated people who were different. I saw neighbors being pushed aside for making mistakes, or worse, for thinking differently. It was a faith that was selective, conditional, and narrow. It made me sick. It convinced me that if God really did exist, He must be just like them, harsh, cold, and inconsistent. I promised myself I wanted nothing to do with any of it. That world made me feel nauseous. That fake love that smiled from the pulpit but spit judgment behind the scenes. Over time, my resentment grew. I focused on studying, working, building my independence, and the more rational I became, the further I felt from anything spiritual. Anytime someone mentioned faith, my internal filter would kick in. Here comes another one trying to convert me. I wouldn't even let them finish. I built walls so high that no one could get through. What I didn't know was that a single act of kindness, at just the right moment, would be the first crack in those walls. Over time, I learned to handle everything on my own, or at least that's what I believed. I became that strong, decisive woman who solved everything with her head, not her heart. Pain? I swallowed it. Disappointments? I hid them. And the questions that hurt the most? I kept quiet. It was easier to look invincible than to admit that, deep down, I was feeling more and more exhausted. I built walls. Not windows, not doors. Walls, tall, thick, and reinforced. And I thought that was maturity. Being vulnerable was a luxury I didn't allow myself. I saw it as weakness. People got used to seeing me as the strong woman, the one who had it all together, who didn't cry, who always had a quick answer for everything. But no one knew what happened when the lights went out and I laid my head on the pillow. That's when the truth started to poke at me. And even though I pretended not to hear it, that feeling only got louder. Something inside me was crying for help. But I no longer knew how to ask. I used to think faith was for people who had no other option. And that's exactly why I refused to be one of them. Pride? Absolutely. Fear of being disappointed again? That too. I was so used to being in control that I didn't see how much that need for control was actually making me sick. And maybe you, listening to this, know exactly what that feels like, to look strong on the outside while falling apart on the inside. That's the false fortress I lived in for years, until life started to shake, and the walls I built began to crack. Everything seemed under control, until it wasn't. It felt like the ground was slowly giving way beneath my feet, inch by inch, without warning. First came the problems at work, projects cancelled, impossible targets, pressure that felt suffocating. Then, a breakup that caught me completely off guard, the kind that takes your breath away and leaves your soul feeling empty. And as if that wasn't enough, I started having anxiety attacks I could no longer hide. My mind was screaming for help, but my mouth kept saying, "I'm fine." The truth is, I didn't know where to turn anymore. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't want to answer, the house felt darker, and even food lost its taste. I couldn't sleep through the night without waking up with my heart racing. That's when I realized, the woman who had it all together, was falling apart inside. I couldn't hold up that armor anymore. And that's when, for the first time, the question I'd been avoiding started to echo inside me: what if I'm wrong about all of this? It wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow, painful unraveling. Like a house built with fragile bricks, breaking down over time until there's nothing left to shelter you. Everything I thought was holding me up started to disappear. There wasn't much left, except the emptiness. But it's funny how, sometimes, it's in that exact moment of weakness that God begins to draw near. We just don't notice it right away, because we're still too busy trying to pick up the pieces on our own. It was on a gray Monday that I met Ellie Adams. I was leaving the office building, my mind cluttered and my heart heavier than I cared to admit. She approached me in the elevator, holding a warm cup of coffee and wearing a soft smile. She seemed out of place, too kind for an environment where everyone's always rushing around with serious faces. We started talking by chance, one of those small chats that should have ended with a simple good morning, but somehow kept going. There was something about her that disarmed me, though I couldn't explain what. Ellie had a quiet way of listening. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix my life, she just listened. And honestly, that alone was rare enough to catch me off guard. In a world where everyone's trying to be heard, being truly listened to, without judgment, has become a luxury. Little by little, I found myself letting things slip out, like a faucet turned on without realizing. And she didn't offer ready-made answers, she simply offered her presence. That threw me off. I'd always avoided deep connections, yet there I was, opening up about things I hadn't even admitted to myself. But the strangest part was that, even without mentioning God, she carried something different. It wasn't religious. It was peace. And that peace, it hurt. It stirred something in me. How could someone be so calm in the middle of the chaos we're all facing? It was like she'd found a source I didn't even know existed. It was just the beginning, but something inside me started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she carried an answer I didn't even know I was searching for. A few days later, we grabbed coffee after work. Nothing special, or at least that's what I thought. The conversation was easy, light, until Ellie, with that calm way of hers, like someone who's not in a rush to convince anyone, said, "It was my faith that got me through the hardest times." And just like that, I froze. It felt like an invisible wall suddenly went up between us. I had just started to open up, and instantly, I shut down. My expression changed. So did my tone of voice. The word faith made me uncomfortable, like it triggered some kind of warning signal. I tried to change the subject, bring up something about work, anything to steer away from that dangerous ground. But even without pushing, she still had that light in her eyes. It was strange. She didn't talk about religion like someone trying to convert me. She spoke about faith like someone who genuinely lived it, like someone who had walked through a desert and survived with water I didn't even know existed. That got to me. It irritated me and intrigued me at the same time. I kept telling myself I didn't believe in any of it, but then why did it affect me so much? I went home feeling unsettled. It wasn't anger. It was something more subtle, a mix of skepticism and envy. Yes, envy. Because deep down, I wanted that peace. I wanted that quiet confidence that, even when everything falls apart, there's something solid to hold on to. But to admit that? No way. So I did what I always do. I put on my emotional armor, acted like I didn't care, and kept moving forward. But something inside me wasn't so good at pretending anymore. A few days after that coffee, Ellie sent me a message. It was direct, but gentle. "If you ever want to come to church with me, you're more than welcome." I took a deep breath, looked at my phone, and rolled my eyes. I replied with a, "Thanks, but it's not really my thing." And I meant it. I really didn't want to go. But for some reason I couldn't explain, that message kept echoing in my head. It was like God had planted a seed, even if I didn't yet realize it was Him gently stirring something inside me. The following week, I had to fix an issue with an address someone had given me, just a routine errand. I got in the car, plugged it into the GPS, and went. The map sent me to a different street, and when I parked, there it was. A small church, made of white bricks, with a glowing sign out front. I was about to leave, but a smiling group at the door waved at me like they'd been waiting. I felt awkward turning around, so I decided to step inside, just to be polite. At least, that's what I told myself. 5 minutes and I'm out, I thought. Little did I know that this one awkward step was the beginning of a brand new path. I sat all the way in the back, trying to make myself invisible, hoping no one would notice me. The atmosphere was calm, no pressure, no overwhelming vibe I had always feared. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel judged. It wasn't about doctrine. It wasn't about rules. It felt like everything had aligned to bring me to that exact place, on the right day, at the right time. And while I sat there, trying to figure out how I'd even ended up in that room, my heart, locked up for so long, started to give signs that maybe, just maybe, it was ready to hear something my mind had never allowed. That Sunday, all I wanted was to take care of something simple, find the address of a new store opening in town. I grabbed my car keys, threw on whatever clothes I could find, and headed out like I was checking off another task on my to-do list. Nothing about that day felt special. The sky was overcast, my mind was full of unfinished thoughts, and my heart was still a mess. But it's funny how God often chooses the most ordinary days to do something extraordinary. The GPS led me to a street that looked familiar, and when I parked, it was the same church from the week before. And just as I thought about backing out, the bells started ringing. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to go in. No invitation. No pressure. I just walked in. Like something inside me was quietly saying, "Go." The atmosphere was peaceful, the air smelled like fresh coffee and old wood. Simple people, speaking softly. I sat in the back again, but this time not to hide, this time to observe. And there, on that wooden bench, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, something inside me started to soften. I wasn't running anymore. For the first time, I was just there. As the service began, I had this strange feeling that the place somehow knew me. Not the building itself, but the atmosphere. It was like the peace in that room was speaking to the chaos inside me. And you know when everything around you just seems to pause? That's how it felt. My restless heart finally settled. I still had doubts. I still questioned a lot. But I no longer felt like running away. It was just the beginning, but in that moment, a part of me had already started to surrender, even if silently. It was when the band started playing that something completely new happened to me. The song was simple, not overly rehearsed, but the lyrics pierced through me like an arrow. It felt like they'd been written just for me, as if someone had searched through my heart and turned everything I never dared to say out loud into a melody. I sat still, trying not to show what I was feeling, but inside, something was shaking. It was like that song was gently tearing down the walls I had spent decades building. The singer's voice wasn't perfect, but it was real. She closed her eyes, raised her hands, and had the kind of expression that showed she truly believed what she was singing. And that broke through my defenses. Because this wasn't a performance. It was surrender. I closed my eyes, just for a few seconds, and let the words wrap around me. Even if I run, your love still chases me. That line undid me. I had spent my whole life running from anything that mentioned the name God, and now here I was, standing still, moved, undone by a song. It didn't make sense. But I couldn't fight it. It's hard to explain what I felt. It wasn't just emotion. It was as if, for a moment, someone had taken the blindfold off my eyes, and I could finally see what had always been there. God's presence didn't come with thunder or shouting. It came through a soft, steady song that went straight to my wounds. And in that moment, I understood, God knew exactly where to find me. And right then, He was beginning to do what no one else ever could: reach my soul without pushing, love without pressuring, and heal without hurting. Right after the music, a man stepped up to the pulpit. He had a simple appearance, dark blue suit, a worn-out Bible in his hands. His name was Pastor John Harper. He didn't have the dramatic voice I was expecting, nor did he speak with a sense of superiority. But the moment he started preaching, something shifted in the room. He didn't read the scriptures like someone checking off a task. He spoke as someone who had lived every word. And for the first time, I felt heard. It was as if he was telling my story out loud, without even knowing my name. What shook me the most was when he looked out over the congregation and said, "Maybe someone here today once said they'd never set foot in a church. But God planned this moment to remind you, He's never given up on you." My heart skipped a beat. Was it just a coincidence? I guess. Or something more? My eyes started to water, but I didn't let a tear fall. I wasn't ready for that yet. Still, something deep inside me shouted, "He's talking to you." And for the first time, I couldn't argue back with logic. Because what I felt didn't come from reason, it came from the Spirit. The pastor's eyes weren't full of judgment, they were full of compassion. He spoke with authority, yes, but it was the kind of authority that comes from someone who's been broken and put back together. I saw truth in his eyes. And even without saying a word to me directly, he became one of the tools God used to show me, "You're not alone." I didn't give my life to God that day, but the process had begun. God had reached me. And through that look, He was telling me, "I know you." I went home with my mind racing. My head was trying to rationalize what my heart already knew but didn't want to admit. It was just a coincidence, I kept telling myself. Just a nice song, just an emotional speech. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. There was something different about that experience, and that's exactly what bothered me. You know that feeling when something inside you starts to shift, even though you're trying hard to keep everything the same? That was it. A strange discomfort, but impossible to ignore. I spent the entire week pretending nothing had happened. I buried myself in work, turned off notifications, avoided talking to Ellie. But when God starts something, you can't just bury it again. The memories came back at the most random times, in the car, in the shower, even standing in line at the grocery store. A line from the sermon, a melody from the worship, the pastor's gaze, it all kept poking at my soul. And me, the one who had always been great at pushing feelings under the rug, I realized this discomfort was different. It felt like God was calling me, again. I didn't know if I wanted to keep hearing that call. It was scary. Because once you start waking up spiritually, nothing else feels like enough. The things that used to fill the emptiness don't satisfy anymore. Emotional crutches lose their taste. Shallow living starts to bother you. And in the middle of that whirlwind, I realized something had changed in me. And I had no idea how to go back to who I was before. The days that followed felt like a real battlefield inside me. Every morning I'd wake up determined to move on with my life like nothing had happened, but at night, the desire to go back to that church kept chasing me. It was like a part of me had stayed behind on that wooden bench, calling me back. But I resisted. Pride is a tricky thing. It convinces us that turning back is weakness. And admitting that something spiritual had touched me felt like betraying the skeptical woman I'd spent so long building. There was one Saturday in particular when I spent hours just staring at the ceiling, arguing with myself. You don't need that, Lucy. It's just loneliness. It's just a phase. But despite all those arguments, my heart kept whispering, "Go." Like a child tugging at the hem of a stubborn adult's shirt. On Sunday morning, I put on the same clothes I wore the week before, and went. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't make any promises. I went like someone trying not to get too involved, but secretly hoping to be reached again. And when I walked into that place for the second time, something already felt different. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was hunger. Not a hunger for easy answers, but for presence. I wanted to understand why that space made me feel alive again. I wanted to figure out what was there that no therapy, no self-help book, no career success had ever been able to give me. It felt like, for the first time, I was letting God lead me, even if I didn't yet understand how any of it worked. During that second service, something happened that I never imagined I'd experience. Toward the end of the sermon, the pastor invited anyone who wanted to talk to God to come forward. I almost stood up to leave. I didn't want attention, didn't want drama. But then he said, "You don't need to know how to pray. You just need to be honest." And that broke me. Because up until that moment, I'd always thought talking to God required the right words, the right posture, some kind of formula. But right then, all I wanted was to breathe without pain. And when I closed my eyes, without even realizing, I started to pray for the first time in years. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a quiet whisper, muffled by the tears I could no longer hold back. I said something like, "If you really exist, help me." And in that moment, what broke me wasn't shame or doubt, it was truth. Because for the first time, I stopped pretending. I stopped trying to be strong. And I stood before a God I didn't really know, but who somehow already knew me deeply. It was a silent prayer, but a powerful one. It was the surrender of a tired soul finally admitting, "I need help." That prayer didn't fix everything right away. But something inside me shifted. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Not because my problems disappeared, but because I wasn't carrying them alone anymore. And that was enough. I left that church with a swollen face, red eyes, but a lighter heart. And maybe you've already been through something like this, or maybe it's what you need right now. Because sometimes, the soul cries out for help, and heaven answers, even if everything around you is still silent. After that service, I went home a different person. I spent the entire week thinking about that prayer. It was no longer about going to church or understanding doctrine. It was about finally admitting there was something inside me that needed to be surrendered. So one quiet afternoon, I sent Ellie a message, "Can we talk?" She came over with that same calm smile she always had. And there, sitting at the table with 2 cups of tea, I began to talk. For the first time, I told someone everything I'd been carrying for years, the childhood pain, the trauma, the losses, the anger, and the pride. It wasn't easy. Every word felt like it was tearing down a piece of my defenses. But the more I spoke, the lighter I felt. Ellie listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything, she just held space. And when I finished, she gently took my hand and said, "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." It felt like God Himself was saying that to me. In that moment, I realized it wasn't enough just to ease the pain, I needed to let it all go. Every wound, every lie I believed, every layer of self-sufficiency that kept me from experiencing real grace. And there, with tears streaming down my face and a heart still in pieces, I whispered, "I want to try to get to know God." I didn't promise to become religious or to change overnight. But I confessed my desire to open the door. And that alone was a big step. Because up until then, God had always felt like a distant stranger. But now, he was starting to become a father. A father who didn't force me to love him, but who had patiently waited for me, right in the place where I'd gotten lost. After that conversation with Ellie, something shifted in the way I saw the world. It wasn't some dramatic turning point, it was more like a soft light that slowly started to grow. Ellie lent me a Bible and said, "Start with John. No rush." I laughed, a little skeptical, but I accepted it. Over the next few days, I started reading in silence. I didn't understand everything, but somehow, the words felt like they were speaking directly to me. With each chapter, it was like another part of me was waking up. I'd always been driven by logic, but now, something deeper was stirring. I began to pray in a simple way. Just me and God. Nothing rehearsed, just honest, raw thoughts from a soul that was finally allowing itself to be heard. I talked to God while driving, doing the dishes, right before bed. And to my surprise, I started noticing small answers. Not voices from heaven or mystical dreams, but subtle things in everyday life. A verse showing up at just the right moment. A sense of peace in the middle of chaos. A comfort that didn't come from me, but clearly held me up. This faith being born in me wasn't forced or passed down, it was being built gently, watered with honesty. It wasn't perfect. I still had doubts, questions, fears. But I wasn't closed off anymore. I wasn't that hardened, prideful version of Lucy anymore. Now, I was a woman under construction, learning to trust a God who, even if I didn't fully understand yet, was clearly present in every small step I dared to take. It didn't happen overnight, but people around me started to notice something different. "You seem different," they'd say. And they were right. I felt lighter. Not because everything was suddenly fixed, my problems were still there, but because I wasn't carrying them alone anymore. Even the way I spoke began to change. I used to be sarcastic, sharp, impatient, but I started speaking with more grace. I smiled more easily. I really listened. And it didn't come from some conscious effort, it came from within. It was like the new version of me was finally finding space to be born. My coworkers noticed. One friend even asked if I had fallen in love. And I said, "Actually, yeah. But it's with something I can't quite put into words." It wasn't a romance, it was redemption. For the first time, I looked in the mirror and saw someone being rebuilt. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. I started to see myself through the eyes of a loving father, not as the woman who had to be strong by hiding her weaknesses. I started attending small church gatherings. I didn't talk much, I just listened. But in that space, surrounded by ordinary people, I found a sense of belonging I didn't even know I was searching for. I discovered I didn't have to be perfect to be accepted. That God wasn't waiting for a performance, He just wanted my heart. And that's what I started to give Him, one piece at a time. And the more I gave, the more I realized I wasn't just changing. I was becoming who God created me to be. This time, it wasn't by accident. It wasn't a GPS mistake or a last-minute invitation. I woke up early, got ready calmly, and left home with a clear destination, that church I once swore I'd never set foot in. But now, everything was different. I walked in with an open heart, no resistance, no sarcasm. For the first time, I wasn't just a curious visitor, I felt like I belonged. I sat in the same spot as always, greeted people I now knew by name. And when the music started, it felt like coming home. It didn't take long for me to get involved. I joined the welcome team. Ironic, right? Me, the one who spent most of her life rejecting everything related to church, was now one of the first to stand at the door and say, "Welcome." But it was through that simple act that I truly understood the power of restoration. God didn't just pull me out of the pit, He gave me a new purpose. With every hug I gave, it felt like He was gently reminding me, "That's how I welcomed you too." And that gave me strength. It reminded me of how far I'd come. Seeing other people walk in the same way I once did, with fear, doubt, and broken hearts, reminded me that this journey isn't just about me. It's about what God wants to do through me. And there, in that community, through laughter, prayer, and stories of new beginnings, I finally understood, it's not about religion. It's about relationship. And in that place, with those imperfect but loving people, I didn't just find a routine, I found a family. If someone had told me years ago that I'd end up sharing this story, I probably would have laughed in disbelief. But today, I'm living proof that God never gives up on anyone. Not the overly rational. Not the deeply wounded. Not the one who built walls and swore she'd never set foot in a church. Because He found me right where I thought I was safest, in my pride. And He showed me, patiently, that His love is more persistent than any resistance I tried to hold on to. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a rescue. God surrounded me with circumstances, used people, and guided my steps through paths that felt messy, but were actually leading me straight to the center of His will. And it all started with that so-called coincidence that wasn't a coincidence at all. He had set it all up, that day, that worship song, the pastor's words, that conversation with Ellie. Every detail had a purpose. And now, looking back, I get it, He wasn't late. He was waiting for the exact moment I'd finally stop fighting against grace. Now I see life with new eyes. The woman who used to mock faith now prays with faith. The one who looked at church with disdain now finds refuge in it. The one who used to run from God now runs toward Him. I'm living proof that no heart is too far, too cold, or too broken for God to restore. And if He did that for me, maybe the real question is, what might He be trying to do in you? Maybe you're listening to all of this with a lump in your throat. Maybe, like me, you've also said, church isn't for me, or faith is a waste of time, or even God has forgotten about me. But let me ask you something, honestly, what if this story didn't reach you by accident, but because God is calling you too? What if this video is the push you've been needing to take that first step towards something your soul has been longing for years? Have you ever stopped to think what could happen if you stopped running? What if you simply decided to pray, even if you don't know how, and said, "God, if you're real, show me"? That's how it started for me. And maybe that's how it'll start for you too. What do you have to lose? Now think, what could you gain if you said yes? If this story spoke to you in any way, drop a comment below. I want that encounter too.